email, and I will respond. So let's get started. First of all, I'd like to give you some information about SCORE. If I can get my slides to move, there we go. SCORE's mission is to foster vibrant small business communities. We hope that all of you as small business owners have the opportunity to receive the resources that you need and be successful. So we are made up of volunteers. Here's some of the impact of SCORE over the years. In the most recent year, we helped to start over 30,000 businesses and also to generate 150,000 jobs, which is pretty impressive, I think. So we have all types of entrepreneurs that we work with. We have approximately 10% of our entrepreneurs are veterans, and over 50% are women, which is fantastic. We do have a code of ethics. So if you work with a SCORE mentor, you can be confident that your information is not going to be shared in any way. It's not going to be used to make money. We do keep it in our database, which is protected and confidential. Here's a quick snapshot of our website. If you go here, you can sign up for a local mentor. You will see an array of the bios of all of our mentors, so you can choose someone who has the background that would suit you. Here you will also find a list of all the upcoming workshops that are live, as well as close to 100 recorded workshops. So if you don't have time to show up for a workshop, you can go to our website and review the recorded workshop. And then there are lots of other resources such as templates for business plans, marketing plans, and so forth, and articles and blogs. So go to our website, take a look at it. You'll find a lot of useful resources. We get back. We don't want to be on the home page. Okay. Our services are free, partially because we get some funding from the Small Business Administration, but also because we get a lot of support from local businesses that are interested in supporting the growth of small businesses in our community. So here is a link to our website. And again, you will get the recording, the link to the recording and the set of the slides. And on the slides, if you put it in the slideshow mode, all of the links will be live. So they will take you to the specific space indicated. So our session objectives today are to help you find out where you can find grant opportunities. How do you determine that you're eligible? We want you to understand how to approach writing a grant and what sorts of things you need to include in your application. So where are places that you'll find opportunities? Sometimes from your board members, especially local grants opportunities. Your boards may well be aware because they sit on multiple boards or they're involved in other types of organizations that give grants. So do check with your board members. Of course, you can simply do a Google search and indicate, what organizations supply grant money to nonprofits that match my mission. And then you can take the time to go to businesses and foundations that are locally. But probably the most expedient way to find grant opportunities is to go to candid.org. Now, Candid is a wonderful resource. It used to be called the Foundation Center. It has a list of all of the organizations that give grants, particularly private organizations. And not only can you find that they give grants, but that they support organizations like you? What type of organizations have they given grants to, and what amounts have they given? So that would give you an idea of where you might be more likely to find funding. From the federal, you can go to grants.gov. That again represents 26 government agencies. And if you put in a keyword, it'll bring up any grant opportunity that includes that keyword. So you'll find there are quite a lot and you have to wade through them, but they're very current. You can also sign up for a listserv that will send you the ones that you identify you're interested in. So here are some links. Now this is for the state of Ohio, but every state probably has some sort of support for their organizations. There are city links and also county. So one of the things you want to think about when you first look at a grant is whether you're eligible. And almost all grant programs will identify what the eligibility is. They'll say for federal grants, you can register through grants.gov. And first of all, you go to sam.gov and get a universal or unique identifier. And then you can use that to search for any grants. Private foundations generally will list the eligibility in the announcement. Private grants often are made by foundations that are focused on very specific things, like the Ruth Coleman Breast Cancer Foundation, the Brain Tumor Foundation, Leukemia and Lymphoma Organization. But there are a lot also that are more general and may suit your purposes. So if you're looking at federal organization or grants for certain, they will often identify not only the size and types of organizations, but very specific objectives of the funding agencies. And they may tell you what type of organizations are ineligible. Like they will sometimes say you have to be a 501c3 and you have to be in business for a minimum of 3 years or have audited financials. So again, read the eligibility requirements. From a federal perspective, they rarely fund startups unless they're specifically asking for a new program. But in general, if they're asking for a new program, they would like it to be a new program of a substantially structured foundation. In other words, if you have been in business for 10 years and they're asking for a new program, they would be happy to accept your application. If you're brand new and starting a new program, they're less likely to be willing to do that. So you want to make sure that you meet the eligibility requirements. So again, if you're in doubt, call the program director. Every federal grant has a identified program director. Many of the private foundations If you look on your website, you will find the name of the program director, and you should call that person, identify that you're interested in grants and want to know specifically what their objectives are in funding. So the granting agencies want to know all of these things. What is your track record? What have you accomplished? And specifics of how you will use the money. Now, I think you all received the self-assessment tool that I sent out. That really goes over all of the things that you need to have in place before you really start applying for grants. At minimum, you need, of course, to have your mission and vision statement. You should have a business plan. Um, you should have a good financial management system. All of these organizations want to know how you use the money. And most of them are very specific about what they're funding. So if they give you money for a new program to support very specific activities, they do not want you to be using that money for administrative support or other organizational support. So you have to be able to report back to them, here is how we use the money very specifically. So do keep that in mind. You do need to have those things in place. It's wonderful if you have experience working with grants or actually applying for grants in the past, or have somebody in your organization that has that experience. So ideally, if you have your business plan available, so much of what you're going to use in the grant application can be basically cut and paste from your business plan. But certainly critically is a good financial plan. And if you don't have that, it's going to be very hard for you to develop a good grant application. So you want to apply for funds that support your strategic and business plan. So if the grant is for something quite different, which would require that you revamp your business to fit the grant application, that's probably not a very smart move. You want something that is going to help you grow your business. So for private grants, and I think most of you will be probably starting out with private foundations, they have very specific objectives in how they're giving out funds. So if you go to their website or if you look through Candid and find out what their specific goals are, and if those are consistent and congruent with your goals, then it's probably smart to use them as a potential donor. Some organizations, and I'm thinking mostly of banks and commercial businesses, if you don't quite fit the grant parameters, you might be able to fit a charitable donation. Now, the difference is a charitable donation is usually a one-time gift, and it doesn't generally require much in the way of reporting. It gives you a little more flexibility, but it's always just a one-time thing. So you want to think about what fits your needs. So I said private grantors have their objectives, and they will say, you know, we will support community activities and with activities that support low income maybe income youth, education, economic development. So if you fit one of those, you don't have to fit all of them, but if you fit one of them, that's a good potential source for funds. I'm quoting, this is from one of the bank foundations. As a corporate neighbor, our focus is on neighbors, education, and workforce, with an emphasis on racial, economic, and environmental equity. So, for instance, SCORE, we are a nonprofit. We raise a good deal of our money, probably 75%. And so we would apply to this particular funder by saying that we support education and economic development in the inner city. We work with the community development centers to help entrepreneurs who don't have a lot of money to invest in getting help to start their businesses. We provide that for free. And so we are able to get funding from banks and other private institutions to support the local neighborhood. So when you look at your application, again, you need to have your mission statement. They always want to see a background summary and the statement of need, which is critical. What are you asking for funding for? What is it that, and how is it going to make a difference? So it's basically, what is your program going to do, and who are they going to do it, and what are they going to do it for? So that, and again, the project is something within, usually within your organization. So if you're writing a grant to support the startup of an organization, it's pretty difficult to get funding, again, unless they specifically indicate that they fund startups. Many times the expectation is that you are a solid organization. You want to start a new program within your organization as a project, or maybe you have a specific project that you want to do on a short-term basis. Maybe you've decided that you're going to help a local organization get established as a new organization, and that's your project. So again, it's not generally to support your entire, excuse me a minute. Sorry, my phone rang. So again, the content of your application is to include the title of your project. What is your total funding request, and what type of support are you looking for? Are you looking for operations, program, or capital? In general, many private foundations will not support operations. They will support a program. So when I say they don't support operations, it doesn't mean that they don't support operations relating to that program. So if your organization is starting a new project and your administrative person is spending 10 or 15% on that project, they would fund that 10 or 15% of their salary. They would not fund 100% of that salary to do the administrative work for the organization. So, and also many private foundations will not support large capital expenses. They might support computers, upgrading computers, that type of small capital. But in general, if you're looking at large capital expenses, you probably want to conduct some type of capital fundraising. So then you want to put in a description of your project. And a lot of times they'll just say, upload the file. They want to know the start and the end dates. And then they want to know, where will the services be provided? Many of the local or regional organizations are very specific about what area they are willing to support the activity in. For instance, the Cleveland Foundation will support activity in Cuyahoga County or Lake County, but our SCORE chapter, for instance, covers 8 counties. So if we're going to do something in other counties, we can't apply that for Cleveland Foundation funds. So those are things that you need to be aware of. They want to know the number of individuals served. So obviously, if you have fairly large numbers, that's more impressive than if you say, well, we're going to serve 10 people this year. They're probably not as engaged in funding that level. But what is the impact of your program? You need to be able to show what your work has accomplished. So for instance, for SCORE, we count the number of mentoring sessions we do. We count the number of webinars we do, but that's not a whole lot of impact. The impact is, how many businesses did we help get started? How many jobs did we help create? That's the impact. And that's what they want to know. They say, okay, so maybe you mentored 1,000 clients, but what was the impact of that? How many jobs did you actually help? And if we can't come up with that number, then it doesn't show the impact, the actual impact. So they want your budget detail, and that would be not only for the project, they generally want your total organizational budget. They want to know what part of that budget is going to be used for the program. They also want to know what other organizations have you applied to for funding, or what other organizations are actually providing funding for that project. So again, this is where your business plan comes in handy. If you have a good business plan, you can just cut and paste into that application. And also, many of these applications are asking for exactly the same type of information. So if you have a good business plan, a good budget detailed, you can apply for multiple grants using that same information. So, and don't think that you can't apply for more than one funding application at the same time, because if you're lucky and you get more than one willing to fund your application, many times they don't fully fund it. If they do, that's great. But then if the second one also agrees to fund, you could ask them to postpone till the following year. Or, if you feel like you're going to get multiple years of funding from the initial funder, you might just say thank you, but we have adequate funding. So apply to as many as you feel are willing to support the kind of program that you have in mind. So again, they want the primary geographic area. They also often want to know the ethnicity because many of the efforts that the local foundations have are to support underserved areas. So if you're serving an underserved area, that's a plus. Some of them want to support particular genders. And they'll ask if you're serving people with disabilities, etc. And if that's probably usually a plus, but not necessarily if your program isn't the type that would support those types of individuals. So one question that might be difficult for you to answer is, what is the current health status of your organization? So they want to know how many staff do you have? What's your overall organization? And they, as I said, they ask for your overall budget, not just the project budget that you're asking for funding for. Many of them are still asking, how have you been impacted by the pandemic? How has that changed? Has it changed your mission? How has it changed how you operate? Hopefully, we're close to the point where they're going to stop asking that type of question. Many of the organizations want to know, do you have a DEI statement? And if not, do you plan to? Some of them want to know if you have an environmental sustainability strategy. And what are you doing to impact climate change? I mean, some of these clearly have little relevance for what you're doing, but you still have to respond to them if they're asking that issue. And some of them are just asking that for informational purposes. They're not necessarily judging you on that one way or the other. They're just trying to compile information about their community. They all want a list of your board, and many of them want a list of your staff members. You will have to provide a copy of your determination letter, your 990, and do keep in mind that you have to file a 990 every year. If you don't, you risk losing your 5013 status. So, and they also want your most recent audited financial statements. So here's just an example of a project that I'm looking at. So we want to expand an Empower Her facility, which is a facility support young women. We're asking for a funding request of $150,000. We're looking at distributing it in this way. We're going to upload a file, and we say this is going to go from January 1, 2025 for 2 years to December 31, 2026. And then here's a background sort of statement, which is just kind of a summary. Organization, where is it located? When was it established? What is it going to do? It's going to provide comprehensive support, safe housing, and life skills training to at-risk teenage girls. So, and then we're going to say, this aligns with your foundation objectives of supporting education and workforce development, especially among underserved populations. This is very important for you to make a clear statement of how your project supports that organization's objectives. That's really important. And the reason I say that, for many years, I've done reviews for the National Institutes of Health. One of the things that makes it easier, excuse me, it makes it easier for the reviewer if they can see that your project clearly supports the organizational project. So if the NIH, and I'll show you an example of what they do um, for their applications, uh, you always want to say, here's how my program aligns with your objectives. So we go on to say about our organization, we offer a unique model. We collaborate. We talk about what organizations we're collaborating with. That is, again, very important. If you have an educational program, for instance, you would want to have relationships with local schools or some type of educational institutions um, for a number of reasons, maybe just to get referrals, but also maybe to exchange your syllabi or your curriculum so that you can interface with the local schools. Uh, so, keep in mind that it's very helpful if you have a network to work with. So we say, why are we requesting funds? We're doing it because we want to expand our physical facilities so that we can serve more young women. So we say, this is what we want to do. We represent 6 different ethnic and racial groups. We have a qualified staff of 28 people. So we talk a little bit about our organization as well. And then another critical thing, what are our key performance indicators? How are we showing that we're successful? And I recommend very strongly, if you're just starting your nonprofit or if you've been in business for a while and you don't have very clear key performance measures, make sure you develop them. Because if you're going to apply for a grant, you have to be able to show that you have a measure of how you're going to be successful. And if you don't have a measure, how do you know you're successful? That's the issue. So here for this organization, we're saying we have the number of percent of residents graduating with a high school diploma. We have a number graduating for their life skills program that qualify them for entry-level jobs. How long does it take for them to find their first job? And what are the numbers that are going on to higher education? So those are very clear numbers that we can measure and show that we are being successful in what we endeavor to do for these young women. So again, the budgets will include not only the program budget, but the entire organization's budget. And then they, again, want a list of other organizations that either that you've applied for or that are already financing your project. So I'm going to stop there for a minute and see if there's any questions that I can answer. Please, let's see. Okay. A lot of these are good morning, good afternoon. So, okay, so we have people from all over. That's great. And again, a lot of the stuff that I have is focused on Ohio, but every state has very similar organizations that support nonprofits. And, you should look at your city website, your county website, your state website, all of those to find support for your nonprofit. So this is not only for nonprofits. The real issue is for profits. There are very few grants available, and that's because nonprofits can't go to a bank and get a loan under most circumstances. For-profits can. If you have a solid business plan and a good cash flow projection, you can go to a bank and get a loan. So in general, most grants are geared towards nonprofits. There are a few that the federal government has. They're called Small Business Innovative Research Grants, and they usually come in two phases. The first is if you have something that, particularly a technology that you've developed and you need help with both the development and the commercialization, the government will give you a phase one grant to help you with the development. And often this is in conjunction with a for-profit that has that experience of developing those kinds of technologies. And then if that's successful, you can go to the phase two, where that's to develop the commercialization aspect. So that's a government grant program and there are, and I, at the end, I think have a list of companies that do give small grants to for-profit organizations. Many of them have clear expectations. For some of them, you have to actually have either work for their organization or have a relative that does. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. But no, it's not just for nonprofits, but as I say, the grants for profits are pretty limited. So I hope that assessment tool is helpful, and I would suggest that you go back and re-look at it after you've gone through this webinar. But I also hope that if you don't feel you're quite ready to be applying for grants, that you go and get a SCORE mentor who can help you put together that business plan and that financial plan to make you more ready to be able to do an application. Okay, how can a new entity appear more robust with a track record? Should I include personal highlights? If you have a background where you have worked in other nonprofits and you can show that you've been successful, that certainly helps a lot if you're trying to start a new nonprofit. So yes, you could include anything in your background that says, I've done this before, I've done it well, and I'm going to do it well this time. So feel good, no reason not to toot your own horn if it's of value in getting you some funding. The links that I've provided are free. Again, Candid is an interesting organization. It does cost to join it because it generally supports universities and libraries and things like that. But you can go to your local library and see if they have access to Candid And if they do, then you can use it for free. And I would definitely recommend that you find a library that does have the candid database. And certainly the reference librarian should be able to show you exactly how to use it. And because otherwise it's very expensive. So again, do hunt around if you have to. I know in Cleveland, the Cleveland Public Library has access, the Cleveland Heights Library, the Twinsburg Library. I think you could, so there are 6 or 7, the Westlake Library. So there are quite a few. And I would think, again, there are, I believe, 5 candid centers throughout the country. And many libraries and universities are members. So, if you're close to a university or you're close to a library, check it out and see if they have access. There is no cost to use grants.gov. What you will find a little bit frustrating is if you put in a keyword, dozens of grants will come up. And so sorting through them is a little bit tedious. So again, you might want to sign up for the listserv that sends you only RFPs that pertain to your particular title. Again, yes, you will be able to access the information. We're sending you a copy of the slides and a link to the recording. The recording will be on our website within the week, but we'll send you the link to our YouTube channel. If you are a sole proprietor in a one-man band, can you apply for a grant to support your new business? The answer to that is yes, but it depends on, again, having a robust business plan and a good budget and good measures of your success. And it's good if you have at least, say, 6 months to a year of operations so you can show that you have some success. But I would also suggest if you don't quite fit the grant profile, that you consider asking for a charitable donation. And again, it might be a few $1,000s, but that might be enough to get you started. So think of that as an alternative. Okay, let's see. Yes, and it's true, as I said before, that you do need to register on sam.gov and get your UEI so that you can apply for federal grants. Not all grant applications receive funding. Well, we just got rejected for one that we applied for. So the best practices, I think, to avoid being rejected is exactly what I suggested, and that is to make it very clear that your goals align with the goals of the funding agency. And I'll show you, now we'll go on to government grants, and I'll show you how I've responded to government grants. And again, I've done a lot of grant reviews. And to be honest, if you review grants, it's a bit tedious. You want the shortest grant as possible because you don't want to wade through pages and pages. But one of your big questions is, does this application really meet the requirements of our our request for proposal or our request for application, how do they mesh? So if you tell me very clearly that my goals align with your goals in this way, makes it easier for me as a grant reviewer to say, yeah. The other things that are really important when reviewing grants is the principal investigator or the primary person being responsible for the project, do they have the qualifications and the track record to carry out this program? So that's another really critical thing when it comes to the grant reviewer, because you're giving money to somebody, and you want to know that they're going to be able to actually do the project. So let's talk about government grants now. And I don't know how many of you will actually be going to government grants. You should know that government grants are different from private foundation grants in one major way, and that is that the government grants are to support their program, not your program. So they sit down and they say, okay, let's discuss what new programs we want to implement over the next 5 years. And they outline that program, and they put out a request for proposals that say, can you do this program? So again, they describe the program that they want to have carried out. And so you need to read the announcement very carefully. Are you eligible? And if you are, can your organization accomplish the program that's described in the announcement? So you have to think about it in the way that, is this program a program that's going to help my organization either grow or diversify, or in some way, is it going to be a good thing for my organization? Because I'm going to have to allocate staff members, other resources to develop this program the way the government wants it done. So am I able actually to provide those resources without stripping my already in place organization? Then do you have the fiscal and infrastructure? The federal government is very, very clear on detailed reporting. So if you don't have a really good financial system and you can keep your grant money very clearly separated from the rest of your organizational funds, you're going to be challenged. So again, you have to have a really good financial system. Government grants are difficult, particularly the first application. And again, having been a grant reviewer and having heard the people at the NIH talking about giving grants and scoring, they like to give grants to organizations that they know, that they have experience with. So once you get a grant, if you perform very well, your chances of getting subsequent grants improves dramatically. Getting that first one is going to be a challenge unless you are very unique and outstanding in your field. So I think if you're not experienced in grants, you might think about starting with local or regional foundations, which are more likely to support, again, local and regional organizations. So it's a matter of how are you going to implement the project? And again, how are you going to measure the quality of your work? You might have to, if this program is enough different from your usual organizational procedures, you might have to set up a whole new system of measuring your outcomes. So again, what are the goals of the funding agency that the project fulfills? And is that aligned with your organization? Are you able to meet the deadline? And is a letter of intent required? Some organizations, private as well as federal, will require that you develop a letter of intent, and they will only tell you you can go ahead with the application if they approve the letter of intent. So look for that. And again, what goes into the federal applications is a little bit different. If you have a business plan, many times, again, you can cut and paste appropriate sections like the description of your organization, your past performance, your job descriptions, and your financial data. But you also then have to describe how you're going to implement the program that they have asked you to implement. So again, your goals and objectives, are they aligned with the agency objectives? What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? And again, what's the impact and your evaluation criteria? So you, again, want to outline the objectives of the grant from the announcement and determine how your request is going to relate to the objectives. So here's an example, and this is something that I actually did back in the day when I was working in that area. They sent out an RFP saying they want to support access of low income or disadvantaged women to high quality screening for breast, cervical, and ovarian cancer. They also want to assure early detection and treatment, and they want to educate these people on prevention, treatment, and follow-up. So in order to respond to that, again, I'm going to specifically relate each of the objectives to my response. So I'm going to say, to improve access, I'm going to develop a mobile screening van. We're going to go to the areas where low income or disadvantaged women reside. And it's going to contain all the equipment needed for screening. And the visits are going to be scheduled to coincide at the convenience of the local residents. To raise awareness, we're going to go through, use newspaper, radio, TV, PSAs, social media, distribution of flyers, and personal contact. So we're going to do a real media blitz to raise awareness. And then we're going to present local workshops and seminars that will educate women in follow-up care for various cancers. Now, this could also qualify for a local or a regional grant at the same time. So you can apply more than one place. So now for the government grants, the bulk of your application is going to be how you're going to carry out those objectives of this program that the government developed. So you have to think, what are the specific tasks? You have staff available. Can you demonstrate that you understand the work involved? You want to cite your track record and your success. So government grants require more detail because, again, they've got the project identified. They just want to know how you're going to do it. So the implementation details are just as important. And I have to say again, in reviewing grants, that one of the concerns of the reviewers is these people don't really understand how the project needs to be done. Maybe they don't have enough detail, or they don't understand the scope or something. So it's important, if you respond to a government grant, that you make it very clear you understand exactly how this has to be done, and that you have the resources to carry it out, of course, if they fund it. Again, so when you think about a project, it's a big one like that. Fortunately, at that point, I was working at a hospital, so we had the hospital behind us to supply a lot of the support that we needed to make it happen. So the question is, what equipment and materials will I need? Do they need to be developed? If I'm going to do workshops, what materials do I need? Who's going to put them together? Do I have people who can do that? Do I need to hire people? If I'm going to do a mobile van again, are there local people from the institution that I can draw on, or do I have to hire people? As far as the equipment goes, can I borrow equipment from the hospital? Do I have to buy equipment? What staffing do I need? What are their credentials? And then again, how will I recruit these clients? I said I'm going to do a media blitz, but what's the detail? Exactly how is that going to work? So again, do you need to recruit staff? Or do you, even if you have staff, do they need to be trained? If so, where's the training going to occur? Do you have the space and equipment available? Is there going to be a cost involved? So all of these things go into your planning for how you're going to implement the grant if in fact you get the money. And then when will the project be complete? Can it be done in the time frame of the award? So usually they will state how long you can ask for funding. Sometimes it's 3 years, sometimes it's 5 years, sometimes it's only 1 year, but mostly there are multiple year projects. But if you're not able to complete it within the period of funding, how are you going to continue to completion? And then how are you going to measure success? In this case, we said an increase in screening numbers indicates that we've met the awareness criteria. We show an increase in early detection versus the current situation, which was our second objective. And then an improvement in disease-free longevity suggests that we're accomplishing follow-up care awareness. So these are some of the things we would use to measure our success of this project. And then the budget. And the budget's important for anything that you do. You want to be sure that you include all of your costs. You know, don't think if we're the lowest budget coming in that we'll automatically get funded. This is not true. What you need to do is make sure that you have adequate funding to be able to carry out the project. And again, the grant reviewers are generally people who are experienced in this area and will notice if you don't put things in your budget that you'll need to carry out the project. Because what will happen if you don't have adequate funding, you're going to have to skimp on something or cut corners in order to complete the project. So be true to yourself, and you want to list all of the people involved. You want to list their salaries and benefits, all the equipments and supplies. Are you going to have to increase your rent to cover more space? That would be part of the project. Is there travel involved? So if so, you want mileage, hotels, meals, airfare, etc. You want to put those in, even if you have to travel to Washington to meet with the people who are running the project. Put that in the budget. You want maintenance costs. If you have equipment for which you have a maintenance contract, put in those maintenance costs. Add your utilities related again to that project. So then more for the federal grants than local grants, you will have to do a justification. What I have done in the past is use the job description and say, basically, for this project, the individual will carry out this aspect of what their job description indicates that they can do. And so this is how you would do it. You put in their salary, how many months and the total salary, salary benefits, the number of months, etc. And then you say, John Doe will be the project leader and he will do all of this and this. And he has an MBA degree with 15 years experience. And then Ms. Smith is going to be responsible for managing the screening process. So those are the kinds of things you need to include in your budget justification. So then the question comes up, do I need to hire a grant writer? And I think that's really up to you. First of all, if it's expensive and you can't include that in your cost of doing the project, so you have to be willing to shell out that money out of your regular budget. They can be an asset, but I'd say you want to really vet those people and have them show you what successful applications have they submitted before. Do not ever hire somebody who comes and says to you, I can write a grant application for you without knowing what the grant is all about. And I have had clients who come and say, well, so-and-so wrote me a grant application and here it is. Well, it's basically a business plan because they don't have any idea what grant they're applying for. So keep in mind, if you have a grant writer, you're the one that has to supply all the information about your organization, about your budget, everything. They're simply writing it for you. With the advent of all the AI tools available today, I find when I'm applying for a grant, if I write a paragraph or two and put it in ChatGPT and say, make it more marketable or more compelling, or rewrite it to focus on this or that, it does as much for me as any grant writer would do. So, but do remember, if you hire a grant writer, you're responsible for everything that goes into that grant application and everything that's proposed. So make sure that you don't hire somebody who's a creative writer. So again, a grant writer can help you make your story more compelling. Again, AI can do this as well. He or she would also check it for grammar and spelling, check your budget figures and make sure that you meet the formatting and length and that sort of thing. Again, I don't mean to put grant writers out of business, but I think AI can often do the job just as well. In-house written proposals are often very successful. I worked in an organization where we had $60 million in grants. I was responsible for ultimately compiling all of the information in the grant, and we were always successful. So I don't think we applied for anything that we didn't get some funding. So in-house written proposals can be successful. Your staff knows the organization, and so you can call on various people in your organization to help you write the grant. They also are aware of the skill sets of the staff that's available. So who would be able to do what part of the organizational need. They know how and what you can measure. So, I can come and say, well, here are the things you should measure. The question is, do you have the ability to measure those? Maybe you don't have the right database, or maybe you have the data, but you can't extract it effectively. So you need to be in touch with your IT people to know exactly what data you can get out of your database. But it does take up time and effort of your staff. So you want to know who's going to be evaluating your application. The government agencies publish the people on their review committees. So if you go to their website, you can find out who's going to be evaluating your proposal. Foundations are quite different. Some of them have a review committee. You can check their website. Sometimes they will list people, but not very often. A lot of times you have no idea who's reviewing your grant. In the case of some businesses or banks, it could be one person who's looking at it and saying, that really doesn't, fit our needs, or, yeah, let's go ahead and fund it. Sometimes it helps if you know people who work there. So it's a little bit iffier unless it's a pretty big foundation and they let you know who's going to review it. So again, you want to put yourself in the place of the reviewer. If you were reviewing this application, what would you be looking for? You want to make sure that it really targets what you're asking for. You want to know that the people who are doing it know what they're doing. And you also want to know how they're going to measure success. So you want to be realistic. You don't want to propose anything that you can't do. Don't have some wonderful big dream about what's possible if you don't know for sure you can carry it out. You want to be organized. Again, a logical description is much easier for the reviewer to read and evaluate. Be clear, don't use a lot of unnecessary verbiage or jargon. And again, you want to make sure you give enough background to help the reviewer understand about your organization. Have others review, if you write the grant, have other people in your organization review it. Does it make sense? Does it meet the requirements of the granting agency? So if the format for the grant is included in the application, make sure you use them exactly as detailed. Sometimes, mostly because things are submitted electronically, if they limit the number of words, they cut you off when you've reached that limit. So you don't have a lot of chance to go over. Again, they just automatically set it. If you have to include determination letters, list of board members, things like that, make sure you do that, because they can use that as a rationale for disqualifying your application, and you don't want them to do that. And make sure that you get the application in on time, because that, again, is the number one way they can disqualify you, by just saying you didn't get it in on time. So again, if you have questions, contact the program director. In general, they're very helpful. They do want you to be successful, and they do want to know that you clearly understand what's needed. As I mentioned earlier, if you're working with other organizations or agency, that's a plus, but you do want to get letters of support from those agencies. And then have your grant application be reviewed by your board and your staff, again, so they understand what you're committing to and they're supportive of it. So the cycle works that the announcement is developed, it's published, the applications are filed, you have a deadline, the awards are announced, and then the funding are initiated. So the government, if you have a submission date of January 1, you won't hear anything till about October, because it takes them that long to put together a review committee and have everything reviewed, reconciled, and then the funding determined. Private grants, on the other hand, again, they have a submission date. Some organizations will say if it's less than a certain amount, you'll hear within the month. Others will, or we review on a quarterly basis. If it's less than 25,000, if it's more, we review it on an annual basis or semi-annual basis. So they give you an idea, but it's usually, the lag time is much shorter with private grants than it is with the government, because they don't go through as much of a rigorous review process. Here are the criteria that the government uses, and some of the private organizations as well. They want to know the significance. Do the investigators have the appropriate background? Is the project new? Is it looking at a different way of dealing with the problem? Does the approach seem appropriate? And does the environment provide support for the project? So, and the environment is something like I mentioned with the project we did with breast cancer and other cancer screening. We were in a hospital environment, so there were a lot of resources that we could call on because of that. If you're strictly on your own with no resource, it's much more difficult. So don't be discouraged. Hardly anybody gets funded the first time, unless sometimes an organization will see your nonprofit at work and come to you and say, you know, we could provide some funding for you. Well, that's fantastic, and you should take advantage of it. But that's fairly rare. In general, the first time you apply, it's rejected. But what you want to do is ask them, can you provide me some feedback on why it was rejected? And if they give you specific information, you can then reapply, addressing those issues and making sure they've been resolved. Now, the government will send you the commentary of the reviewers and why they thought there were shortcomings in the proposal. So that gives you an opportunity, again, to correct those issues and resubmit the application. So again, don't get discouraged. It's the first attempt in learning. It happens to everybody, and it can be the best application you've ever written and still be rejected. So go back and do it again. So let's head back and see if there are more questions. Where do I find the entities that won the grant? Well, in SAM, if you go to the government, you can find, they've consolidated everything under SAM. So you should be able to find a list of the awards that were made and to whom they were made. I will check that for sure. They used to be under fedbizops.gov, and I don't think they're there anymore. But for the private grants, you can find in the Candid database what used to be GuideStar, that merged with the Foundation Center to make Candid. But in their database, you can find what organizations fund the area that you're looking at, who they funded recently, and how much they've given them. So that would be very useful for you. What is the best way to build relationships with government entities to get letters of support? I don't know that you could get letters of support from the government. If they have a grant program and they ask you for letters of support, that should come from the organizations that you're working with. So if you have an educational program and you're working with school systems, you would want a letter of support from the school systems. The government does offer grants for the arts, and that's under the National NEA, National Endowment of the Arts. So if you put that in, National Endowment of the Arts, you should be able to find information. DEI statement, do I need to have it in writing? The answer is no, although the idea is you have a policy. And if you have a policy is always in writing. You don't have to show it on your website, although there's nothing that actually would be good. So, if you have a DEI statement or a DEI policy, you should publish it so people know that you have it. And that's always good for your organization. So I think I've answered. Let me just go for sure. I don't want to miss. If you're looking at a grant writer, you can go to one of those sites for gig people like Fiverr, or just type in grant writer and in Google and see what you come up with. So Susan Sandoval, I don't mean to denigrate what you're doing, and you might be a great grant writer. There are a lot of grant writers that are not great grant writers. I'm only suggesting that if people want to use a grant writer and can afford it, they should vet somebody before they spend their money. And obviously, if you are seasoned and have been successful, then you would obviously pass scrutiny. Okay, questions on the Q&A. I don't see any questions on the Q&A. Oh, here we are, sorry. Again, the copy of the presentation is going to be on our website by next week, but you will get a copy of the slides and a link to the recording. For a new project, I'm considering opening a new 501c3 as a subsidiary to my for-profit, and that's fine. No, it's probably better if you do your for-profit and then a subsidiary with a nonprofit. Again, if you have experience in your for-profit and you're developing a nonprofit, you can at least show your experience again and your impact of your for-profit as support for an application for your nonprofit. So what is the definition of underserved? Underserved is overused, but it generally means an area of socio and economic depression. And if you look at, say, the Small Business Administration, what they declare as hub zones, and you can look on the SBA website under what is considered a hub zone, those would be considered underserved areas. Please share percentage allocations that foundations would like to see. I'm not really sure what that question is. Please share percentage allocations that foundations would like to see. I'm sorry, I don't really know what that question means. I'm in the Chicago area. Where do I go get it? There are several SCORE chapters in the Chicago area. Just Google SCORE, Google Chicago SCORE, and you will get to their website. And from there, you can get a local mentor. Can labor unions apply for grants? I would say yes, they can. It probably depends on how the labor union is organized, but they don't fall under 501c3, but they can be under a 501 different designation. And I have no idea about their success. But Leo, let me look into it, Leo, and I will see what I can find and send you whatever information I can find. Okay, best practices, as I indicated, make sure that your goals align with those of the funding agency. Make sure you have qualified people to run the program and make sure that your figures are accurate. And those are really the best things I can think of. UEI is your unique entity identification. It's just like a PIN for SAM. No, it isn't better to make the for-profit a subsidiary, the nonprofit. I would do it just the other way around. Overall, it's better to start out with a for-profit for a couple reasons. One, you can get bank funding if you need help getting started, and it's quicker. You don't have to go through the process of setting up a board and all sorts of paperwork and applying to the IRS. Um, I would generally tell my clients, if you establish your for-profit and get it running, then do your nonprofit. That gives you, again, better experience, more potential for being able to support their nonprofit while you're getting it going. So, okay, do foundations like to see? Okay, Darren, I appreciate your giving me that information. As I said, no, I don't think they have any specific allocation. It's a matter of describing what your project needs. And if it makes sense, then it would be approved. So it's definitely, you would want more staff and materials and so forth related to anything related to the program. It's the, say, administrative support or organizational support for the program. For instance, if you have an IT department and they're going to be monitoring the outcome, then whatever time they spend on that program can be part of the program budget. And as I mentioned, if you have an administrative person whose responsibility is to, say, oversee the budgets, provide administrative support for the program, that can also be budgeted as part of the program. It's just that other aspects of the organization that are meant for the organization overall are not acceptable as programmatic. I hope that makes sense. Okay, I think we've got all of the questions. So I hope that's been helpful to you. I put my email address in the chat. It should be up at the top. And again, if you have further questions, feel free to let me know. I'm happy to try to respond. There are blended legal structures such as L3C and flexible. I am not an attorney and I would not presume to give you legal advice. But again, okay, I'll put my contact information in again. Okay, there it is. And again, feel free to email me. And thank you for attending. I know we've gone pretty long and I hope you haven't missed your lunch. So do feel free to attend any and all of our other webinars. We have many things to educate you on. And again, I look forward to seeing you at another webinar.